Hello, everyone, and welcome to the second Medical Delegates webinar. There are two webinars. You can watch them in either order. So if you haven't watched webinar A yet, that's okay. You can stay with us. We'd also like you to watch the water quality decision-making matrix video. So this is the agenda for this particular webinar. We're going to go through some introductions, extreme weather conditions, and how we handle it. We'll give you an idea of some documentation, and then the really fun stuff, the anti-doping information. So that leads me into the introduction. I am Leslie Buchanan. I am the ITU Anti-Doping Director here in Lausanne, Switzerland. But I'd like to introduce you to my friend who's joining us from Canada. Doctor, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Marie-Claude Grégoire. I'm a physician in pediatrics in Canada. I also work as a medical delegate with ITU and as a technical official also with ITU.
And my name is Thanos Nikopoulos. I'm the ITU Head of Operations. I will join this two lectures. So we are an open air event, so we are affected a lot from the weather conditions. In ITU, we have adopted the WBGT rule, and we are following the national standards on measuring water temperature and then use the data for the decisions. So this is a tool that is provided by ITU to all the events. The medical delegate needs to take this rule. There are specific instructions that are circulated on how you use this tool, which is quite easy to manage. And then according to the reading that we are getting from this tool, linked with the heat index, then there is a flag system that we are using for communicating this reading to the athletes. So if the reading is lower than 18 Celsius on the heat index, this is a green flag. Between 18 and 23 is yellow flag. 23 and 28 is red flag, and 28 is, as you can understand, I'm European. We have in the technical official documents the templates ready, which they need to be used for communicating any changes on the heat stress conditions. So we have already the template. The only thing that we need to do as a medical delegate is to ask these templates from chief race officials, and then you list this data, and this then piece of papers that are posted on the athletes lounge for the athletes communication and then for specific. So linked with extreme weather conditions, you will be asked to take some decisions that affects, first of all, the courses. For example, if we have changes in the water temperature, or even if due to differences on current of the water, etc. So you as a medical delegate, you need to support take a decision of altering the course. You have again the authority to take decisions on the athletes' uniforms. So, for example, you have extreme cold conditions. You can oblige the athletes to use arm warmers or specific clothes to protect themselves for. And obviously, you are taking decisions with the race referee or the wetsuit, or overruling even these rules. For example, cases that it may be allowed to have a wetsuit, but it's so warm outside, this is not recommended. So again, you with the technical delegate, you will be able to make decisions. The rules that we need to follow in all the areas, they are obviously including competition rules, and the head referee of the event and the technical delegate are the two persons that can guide you through this process and take input on this
So what's very important when we're monitoring, the weather condition of all races is to make sure that we are ready for pretty much anything. Depending where we're located, weather can also change very quickly. So it's not because it's supposed to be warm that we shouldn't be prepared for cold and vice versa. as a Canadian, I've learned that the hard way. So definitely be prepared for anything. And that's part of the pre-planning that we talk about in the other webinar is that, you know, we can't, we don't have a crystal ball. We don't know how it's going to be. So we need to be prepared. Um, Obviously, very hot condition, very cold condition. Sometimes the race is being adapted. Sometimes the swim is canceled. So we need to replan where we're going to treat the athletes. Um, Always think about ordering more than we potentially need. Having more water, having more ice. It's not necessarily easy to suddenly find ice on a Sunday morning at 7 o'clock. So really kind of try to preempt the ordering and have more on site. Um, and things like having more IV fluid, sport drinks, that kind of rehydration is important to have. And always err. My experience is that always go on the side of having a little bit of extra than being short. There's nothing worse than running out of supply before the end of an event.
So it's quite important for any event during the planning process, obviously to get from the organizing committee the expected weather conditions, but then to look into statistics from previous years in order more or less to know what is expected. The list of actions or equipments that MC just mentioned, this is the guidelines that the IDU Medical Committee are providing in case of extreme heat conditions, which means that this needs to be activated the moment that there is an indication that we're going to face this kind of conditions during the race. So the sooner that you try to map out the situation and the sooner you have informed the organizing committee for potential additional measurements that will take place, then the easier it will be to activate this so-called plan B.
And it's the same idea, you know, if it's really, really warm, if it's really hot, to be prepared to have to cool athletes. And sometimes we can have to cool other people too. So please keep an eye on everybody working at the event. It's not unusual to have to take care of a volunteer or an official too. And so we need something where we can really immerse the body in cold water. A lot of places have bath, like the one you can see on the picture, but then we also need to change the water. It can be like, you know, like body fluid in it, so we need a way of filling and emptying quite quickly. And that's very important to test before the race. So you may want to do a dry run or wet run, I guess, if it's with water, but to practice that kind of eventuality before you have to do it in real life. Some places have, like, you know, cooling jacket. I mean, depending if it's an event that is historically extremely warm, they will probably have more resources for that. And again, you know, have plenty of ice, and be sure that you have a quick way of transferring the hospital as needed. If you have access to a building with air conditioning, that's great also to have on site.
I will just reinforce one point that MC mentioned at the beginning. It's not only the athlete's health that we should focus in this kind of situation. Actually, the persons that are way more exposed in these conditions are the volunteers and technical officials and the spectators. Because for them, they will be exposed continuously to specific conditions in a quite significant time. And the athletes, obviously, they have the performance part, which makes things more worse, but even the other group are facing similar challenges. So a plan that will address all these cases, it's quite important.
Yeah. Now, maybe a little bit more Canadian scenario. We have sometimes extremely cold temperature, and we can have very cold temperature in a summer event. So I'm not necessarily talking about winter triathlon, where most people would at least have the proper equipment to be outside in the cold. So that's a different challenge. Many athletes are not used to be in extremely cold condition. They live and train in warmer environment. And so they may not realize how dangerous the cold can be. So we can try to, if the water is still quite warm, but the air is quite cold, we can try at least to temper their temperature with water that is a bit cooler. So, to decrease their body temperature progressively instead of going from really hot water to like super cold outside or cold wind. Um, we can also like request from them if the water temperature is particularly cold to make sure that they have a proper warm up, and so they don't start their race in very cold water. And that would apply to age grouper too, which sometimes is a group that is even more at risk than the elite athlete. To make sure they have plenty of blankets, either the foiled one or like warmer blanket, areas where we can bring people inside, a large number of people inside to warm them up. And it's not luxury to add a medical station. And so we can have a warming station maybe at the end of the swim or on site, like if we already have a wheel stop or an aid station, to add a warming station. So if somebody abandoned the race, they're not going to freeze on the side of the road where they're waiting because they have a bike mechanical. I think, and at least go to a place where they will be protected from the wind, protected from the rain, and be covered, and prevent hypothermia to develop and progress. So that can be very helpful.
Excellent point, MC. So a really detailed list on what around the measurements that need to be taken in these kind of situations can be found in the event organization. In the medical services section, there is a part that speaks about extreme weather conditions and provides guidelines on how you can manage both areas. One more environmental factor that affects our event a lot nowadays is the air pollution. There are international standards, and there is an international index that is applied across the world. You can find the link of the website that basically you can see the index that exists right now in all the cities around the world. Each countries that have different standards, and it may exist that each country may have the different index as well. So it will be a good practice for you to discuss with the organizer and try to find an answer on what is works from or what is applied by from the public authorities in this area. On this table, and MC will go more in detail, this is the air pollution index, the international standard that exists. Which, as I said, this may change from point to point. MC, what is the point where we may consider of changing the event or even canceling the event?
Yeah, so anything unhealthy and above would obviously, we need to consider that we cannot let athletes go, or if they go, then maybe make the event shorter, or we need to adapt. In the obviously good and moderate athletes should be fine, and it's if you go by the color, when it starts getting more in the orange, then some of our athletes, if they're very atopic, if they have asthma, they can start to be accommodated. And again, some of our technical officials, some of our volunteers. So we may want to think, maybe not put people outside for 8 hours in the day, maybe have 2 shifts, be more considerate about that. But when we get into the red, like if there's a lot of forest fire, for example, where, from one day to the other, it can change very quickly because of the wind, we need to monitor that and definitely not send anybody out when it gets, when the number of particles in the air is just too heavy, and we risk to compromise our health, for the race.
So we had cases in the near future, either in East Asia, where we had to cancel events because of the air pollution, and even in Canada, one event due to the bushfire that we had in that territory, which the air quality was affected so much that basically the organizers and the federation had to decide to cancel the event.
And you have to not only think about the event, but the bike and swim familiarizations as well, because those wouldn't be able to go ahead.
The local authorities sometimes will put an advisory. They don't want people to go outside and exercise, and so really try to stay in touch with what public health locally publishes because they know their area. If they don't want people to go outside, it's probably a good thing to, to also not send our athletes outside.
Yes, exactly. So all the items that we just mentioned around extreme weather conditions, they can be found on the event organizer manual, medical services. You can see the link on the slide. And specific protocols and how this should be applied can be found on the medical section, the IT section on the ITU website. Once again, the link is available on the slide. So moving on at the topic, what do you have to share?
Thank you very much for sitting through that boring part of the webinar to get to the exciting part, the anti-doping part. For any events that are World Cup or Triathlon World Cup and above, so World Championships, ITU will actually create a mission order, which will say which athletes will be tested, whether it's placings or targeted, and what those athletes tested for. So we'll create that for you, and we'll communicate that with the anti-doping organization, and the lab also need to know what's being tested for so that they test for the right things. It's really important that we find out who the sample collection agency is so that we can communicate the mission order to them. We need to know who is going to be getting the chaperones. If the sample collection agency will bring in their own chaperones, or the organizing committee having to supply the chaperones. As the medical delegate, if I'm not on site, then you'll have to check out the doping control station with the technical delegate, find out where it is, and make sure that it's adequate and has the privacy and the space that we need, and it's wheelchair accessible and testing triathletes as well. So for the different types of events, we have to test for certain things. This is a mandate by the Anti-Doping Agency, or WADA. And so you'll see that these are the minimum requirements and what those urine or blood samples have to test for within those tests. So certainly an event can do more than these tests, but if they're at that level, they should be doing a minimum of those tests. And if they aren't, then I would appreciate you so I can find out why or support them in making sure that those tests are carried out. With regards to medical treatment, I'm going to ask the doctor to comment in a moment, but sometimes we have athletes who get ill or have an accident and have to go to the medical tent. Doctor, can you tell us a little bit about what happens when you're the medical delegate and an athlete comes to you in a condition?
Yeah, so when somebody comes to the medical tent, often the athletes will even ask, be careful, everything you're giving to me, need to check on the list, etc. So athletes are also very well aware of the limitation, on what they can take or not take. Now, their health always comes first. So if for any reason they need, when we have the luxury of time, we can go and check if it's on the list, not on the list. We can check with anti-doping. We can sometimes reach Leslie and say, hey, is that okay or not? But if in an emergency, sometimes we need to treat and check the list after. If there's a need for an emergency, we can get a therapeutic use exemption urgently, like to save the life of, we're not going to not save the life of someone, obviously. So the athletes can get exempted. What's important is that everything is documented. So everything that will be given to an athlete, the dose, when, the interval, all of this, who gave it, in what form, what route, all of this needs to be documented very well. And if there's any questioning further down the road, if we have the documentation, then everybody is covered. It's just important to have that information. So that's a little bit different than when somebody has a chronic condition and they have a long-term therapeutic exemption because they have a known condition that's been declared. That's a different context, and Leslie will give a little bit more information about that. But I'm talking about the emergency one where we need to treat the athlete. But it's always good to have access to the list directly in the medical tent, just if there are any questions.
Thanks, doctor. So there is a retroactive therapeutic use exemption, similar to the emergency TUE that can be given, but preferably it's given out ahead of time. The athlete has applied for it 30 days before the event's going to take place, so we can process it and grant TUE or deny it based on the merits of it. So there's some more information about TUEs that you can check about on the website, and we also have testing after the event. If an athlete is injured, has to go to the hospital, then you as a medical delegate would have to make a decision whether or not we're going to let that athlete go through with doping control, if the chaperone is going to follow them to the hospital, or if we're going to cancel that test. It's a very difficult situation because once an athlete has been notified, the test is supposed to go ahead. So hopefully we wouldn't notify an athlete that's obviously going to be going to the hospital for legitimate reason. However, if we do have to cancel a test, if you can notify me, then I can maybe follow up and test the athlete at another time, maybe the next couple of days or in that city. So that's what medical issues notify. So there are some contact details. Sergio Migliorini is our ITU medical chair. He also is the chair of therapeutic use exemption, so he would be involved in those decisions as well. You've met Thanos here, and I'm Leslie, and Dr. Gregoire, obviously, in Canada, so we'd like to say thank you and goodbye to her, and thank you and goodbye to all of you for listening to this webinar.